What I want to bring to your attention in just a few minutes is Acts 27 and 28. Are most of you familiar with the story about the Apostle Paul trying to get to Rome? Hello? Yes? Okay. So you remember when he said to Festus, I appeal to Caesar, and Festus said, y'all do know about the story, right? Festus said, to Caesar you shall go. So He's on this ship and he's trying to get to Rome. So there are within that story some very interesting verses and interesting sentences that because of things that have happened to me in my personal life in the last year mean a great deal to me, and I want to share them with you. So if you'll jot these down or highlight these somehow. So in Acts 27, we're going to highlight verse 26. Verse 26. Is anybody there? Do you see what that says right now? What's that say? Nevertheless, we must run aground. How many of you in the room feel like that maybe right now your ship is sinking? Do you know what I mean? Do we have to go Dr. Phil here on us? How many of you, just out of curiosity, let's pick on those of the 40s and the 50s year olds. How many of you can just take a few seconds to reflect? How many of you, you have exactly the life that you said you would have when you were 18? You have the wife, you have the kids, the house. Man, I'm already dizzy and I'm just starting. How many of you have recently had an incident where you really genuinely felt like the ship was falling apart? You don't want to raise your hand, you're embarrassed, okay, whatever. Yet the ship must run aground. And I read that for years and preached it for years without really realizing something, and that is that God is saying, I will not always keep the ship from falling apart. The next verse that you need to highlight is the same chapter, chapter 27, verse 35. Does anybody have that one right now? What's that one say? When he started to eat, he broke the bread. I'm boring some of you already. This is scary. And he gave thanks. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's a fascinating thing to me. The ship's falling apart. It's at night. The men are yelling. Some of the men are trying to kill some of the other men. Some of the men are trying to get off of the ship. And this goober decides that he's going to have a prayer over the bread. The next verse is chapter 27 and verse 44. And if you read that one, you'll see that it says that after the ship had indeed fallen apart, some of them ended up in the water, and what were they clamping onto? Some of them got to shore by riding the planks. I'll tell you what I've discovered. Well, I'm getting to the heart of the sermon. I didn't even do my introduction yet. I'll tell you what I've discovered this year is that God will not always keep the ship from falling apart, but He will give you something to hang on to. And brethren, I just want you to know that you may be what somebody else needs to hang on to. So bear that in mind. And the last verse that you would highlight, the good brother read it for us in the scripture reading, and that would be chapter 28 and verse 9, which says that after he had healed Publius's father of fever and dysentery, that many of the sick people on Malta were brought to him, and what happened? They just stayed sick. They were healed. Is it possible that your shipwreck might be a blessing to somebody else? Let me cut to what the end of the sermon is. You all are thinking, holy smokes, the Spirit came to him, told him to shut up already. I know that many of you are going to be able to relate to me. Just the sheer numbers here, I'm sure it's true. Some of you are feeling like the ship is falling apart or already has. Here's your two options. You can feel sorry for yourself and be bitter and be mad at the world and be a miserable person to be around. It's funny, some of you are looking at other people. Yes, like him. Or your other option is that you can say, God, I don't know why you let this happen. Maybe it was my own fault. Maybe it was somebody else's fault. Maybe it just happened. But use me. And let me try to give somebody else something to float on and hang on to. Those are your two options. Okay, now, let's get to how Aberdeen ties into all that. I get a call from Roger Brumfield, who has been a dear friend of mine for a long time. I served under him. He was one of the elders. I preached for Aberdeen full-time from 1994 to 1996. It was my first full-time located work. Fresh out of Harding University, freshly married to Shannon Deffenbaugh. Some of you know the Deffenbaugh name. Shannon spent a lot of her childhood in this church and in the Aberdeen church. So anyhow, getting to Roger. Roger's in Hawaii. I begged him, I said, Roger, you know that you need pastoral counseling while you're in Hawaii. Please take me to Hawaii. The clubs are ready to go. We can FedEx him. He never called me until he needs something. He calls and he says, Chuck, did Lakeview call you yet? And I panicked. Why? Well, you need to be expecting a call from Lakeview. What's going on, Roger? We're going to do a preacher swap. Ben's coming to us and you're going over there. I thought, permanently? Is this like, the Seahawks are getting rid of Sherman? We're permanent swap here, trade? I'm thinking, I'm just now getting adjusted here. I'm not ready to go over there yet. And he says, what they want is for you to go over there and give a report on what we're doing with the money that they give us. So, if we have some visitors, by the way, if you're visiting, I'm sorry that you gotta hear this. This is stuff that you don't understand and you don't relate to and you don't know what's going on. But if you'll ride this part out, we're going to get back to Acts 27:28. You'll get something out of that, I hope. But what's going on is this church sends the church that I'm now working with, the Aberdeen Church of Christ. If you don't know where Aberdeen is, I-5 this way, 101 that way. If you find the ocean, you missed it. It's just right there. You send us $400 a month. So I stood up before the church at Aberdeen Sunday and I said, what do you want me to tell them? I said, has anybody got any pictures? Because Dan said something about a PowerPoint presentation. We got to find some pictures. Who's taking pictures? Nobody had any pictures. I went to the website. The website still has that Lawrence Redding's the preacher. It's a little out of date. I went to the Facebook page. It's got Lawrence and Rita splattered all over it. A little out of date. It's not helping me any. One of our dear sweet members said, Chuck, we could stage some photos for them. I said, I can't go over there and be a politician, be that blasted disingenuous and phony like I'm some sort of political fundraiser. And here's me handing this sandwich to the homeless guy who looks a little shocked. So you don't get any pictures. You just get me trying to pour my heart out to you. Let me say this first, since you asked, if I could mention what we're doing with the money. And I don't have an exact itemization. I don't think this is the exact place for it, to be honest with you. If the elders of this church want to meet with me sometime this week, Roger and I will drive over, we'll sit down. Roger's got the books. We'll go over all the details if that's what you want. Here's what I can say to you. The two most visible things we're doing. Number one is we work in harmony with the Union Gospel Mission. Is there a Union Gospel Mission here somewhere in Tacoma or close? So you have an idea what it is. Men, women, and children who are living on the streets and the alleyways and the encampments of Aberdeen, they can go, they can stay there a night or two, sometimes longer, depending on their behavior. And they can always go there and get a hot breakfast, a hot lunch, and a hot dinner. So the Aberdeen Church, on the fourth Wednesday of every month, the ladies get together and they cook a very substantial meal. A couple months ago, we went and bought 60 pounds of hamburger. We had meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, a salad, and 2 Texas sheet cakes. I love Texas sheet cake, and it pained me to watch all those homeless men eating my Texas sheet cake. But you do what you got to do. My point is, it's pretty good food. So just from what I just told you, you do the math. You know what it is to go to Safeway to buy the groceries. It's not cheap, and you are helping us to do that. We take them toiletry kits. The women take them, the men usually do not, and you can tell. We take coats and gloves in the wintertime and other items of clothing in the summertime. The Saturday after that Wednesday, we get up early that morning, about 6:30, and we start cooking eggs and prepare the cheese, and we make anywhere from 80 to 100 breakfast burritos. We go down to Aberdeen to the bus depot, or if it's raining, there's a bookstore on the main drag, and we go down there, and they know we're coming. They're all down there waiting on us. We have 2 big, huge pots of coffee, and we give out all the coffee and all the burritos in usually a matter of about 20 minutes. And this is where a missionary who's hoping that the church continues to send him money, this is where he says, and we're filling up the church. But I'm telling you, we're not. Now, I told him, I said, Roger, when I'm done talking, you know how I stick my foot in my mouth and how I can't be phony and how I just call it what it is. I said, Roger, when I'm done talking, you may have gotten your last check from Lakeview. So, they're not flocking to the church building. But here's the way we look at it. We're just convinced if Jesus was there, He'd hand out a burrito. And we're just convinced that maybe somewhere, maybe sometime, we're saying something or doing something that would make some of these people think about their eternal salvation. The other significant, tangible thing that we're doing, and I'm even embarrassed a little bit to tell you about this, but it is what it is. We're trying to put some money into the physical campus of the Aberdeen Church building. Now, you and I both know that we don't need a church to have church, right? But to the unchurched, how do they identify us? This. And if the weeds are grown up and it's got a bad paint job and the parking lot is too dangerous to come into, are we going to grow? No. We got to do something. We have to make it appealing. We have to have something that draws them in. So, bless their hearts, the Aberdeen Church, for a number of years, they just had enough money to pay the preacher and pay the bills. The building needed painted, the roof needed work, the inside needed work, the trees had all grown up over the parking lot. When my wife Shannon and I got there, we weren't there 2 days when I discovered in a very dangerous and disgusting way that the local prostitutes and drug dealers were using the church parking lot to conduct business. When I would walk from the parsonage to my office, I carried my 9mm with me. And I thought, this need not be. But you know, when you're hand to mouth and somebody says, I think we ought to cut trees, everybody looks at you like you're an idiot. Where are we going to get money to cut trees? But because of what you have agreed to do with us, we're making things safer and more presentable, and who knows, but somewhere down the road, somebody might come to Christ as a result of this. But I said all that to say this. When I said to the church, what do you want me to say to them? One brother came up to me and in tears, he said, Chuck, you need to make sure that you tell them about the intangibles. He said, you make sure you tell Lakeview it's not just about the check, the $400. It's just the acknowledgement that they care about what we are trying to do on the harbor. And I'm telling you, brethren, whether it was $40 or $400 or $4 million, by the way, if you want it to be $4 million, we'll take it. But the point is, when that thing comes in the mail, that is more confirmation that we're not out there by ourselves. And I'm telling you that it's like how it is everywhere. The world is a cesspool, and it looks like the devil's winning, though he has lost. But sometimes you can feel a little bit overwhelmed, but when you know there's a sizable, functional, influential church like you, who are every month thinking of us, there is an intangible sense of, well, really it's not intangible. You can really feel it. You can almost see it and touch it, of people being in a good mood and being excited. And what does that translate into? When people in a church are excited and in a good mood, how does that translate? Anybody? Enthusiasm? They start telling others. And that's what we got going on there, brother. People are getting more excited, and now they're inviting people to come see what we got going on. It's just an enthusiasm. Now, I'm going to speak real candid here. Y'all know the Reddings? Y'all are looking at me like he's fixing to say something bad about them. No. The Aberdeen church had reached a very low point. And as one of the members said to me, Chuck, we were just down to the nubbins. When Lawrence and Rita and 500,000 children showed up at once. They showed up at once. And they transformed the place. Brethren, I know from whence I speak. I know the history of the congregation. I was there in the old days. And that fire that Rita has under her, and that evangelistic fervor that Lawrence has, and the talent of those children, and the singing, and just the spiritual cheerleading, I'm telling you that when they left, it devastated that church. Devastated them. If at the same time they had left and they needed to leave, I know Lawrence wasn't well and he had to go back east. If at the same time he had left, you had ceased sending your support, do you all understand how devastating that would have been? But bless your hearts, you opted not to do that. And you kept it coming. And you are making a difference. God is good all the time. And all the time, God is good. This story, well, now wait a minute. Let me back up. More candidness. Do I have time for more candidness? I have 4 minutes. Wow. I got to tell you, folks, I didn't want to be there. And I still have days where I don't want to be there. I was in my beloved Ohio, been living there for 15 years. I'm an Ohio native. All this talk about the restoration movement, it just made me very homesick today. I've had the privilege of preaching in the church that Alexander Campbell literally built, the first building that said Church of Christ, Bethany, West Virginia. That's where I was living. Monroe County has the same area almost as Thurston County, but only has 15,000 people in it, and 33 congregations of the Churches of Christ. We had this thing in my family, Shannon and I, where I would say, I am never going back to Aberdeen. And when things got bad, sometimes I would say, at least it ain't Aberdeen. Isn't that awful to say? It certainly wasn't the people, because they were better to me than I will ever deserve them to have been, and I loved them then and I love them now. But I want to tell you what killed me. The sun doesn't shine in Aberdeen. Gray's Harbor. I don't know who named it, but he was right. And y'all got all this jargon and these semantics. It's not, the rain will turn to showers. It will mist. It's rain. And it's constant. And it was depressing. And I just remember saying to Shannon, I'll never go back to Aberdeen. I had a chance about 15 years ago to buy my first home. I'd spent my whole adult life living in parsonages. You know what parsonages are? People tell you how to paint it, how to mow your grass, where to park your car. You don't have one landlord, you have 300 landlords. Oh, it's wonderful. And I was just basking in my own home and my pasture and my horses and my chickens and my ducks and the cows and the cats and the dogs, and it was just wonderful. And I said, I'm not leaving Ohio, and I'm not going to Aberdeen, and I'll never live in a parsonage ever again for the rest of my life. All joking aside, if you love God and you want to be a servant of God, you should never shake your finger at God and tell Him what you will do and what you won't do. Because God will let you know who's boss. And I was in that parsonage about 2 days, and I just about had a meltdown. And I just about dropped to my knees and said, well, God, you are the boss. You are the boss. Can I ask you this? Do you have to be where you want to be to do what God wants you to do? No. In fact, most of us, if we're honest, are not where we want to be. But God is still waiting on you to serve. So here's the story in the book of Acts, real quick. Okay, now I have 2 minutes. Real quick. Paul's on the ship. Things are looking a little bit rough. They come to this place called Fair Havens. Remember that? Paul says, look, guys, it's winter time for pity's sake. It's going to be rough. Why don't we just stay here the winter? Well, they're not going to listen to this dopey prisoner. They put him on another ship, and away they go. They're out in the middle of the sea. Storm comes up. Man, it gets bad, and it gets bad fast, doesn't it? It is so bad that they had to run ropes down either side of the ship. Remember that? To hold the thing together? That's when I start saying, it might have been a bad idea to leave. People are getting nervous. They're getting agitated, getting angry. Paul says, okay, let's have a quick meeting here. Here's what happened. I talked to God via an angel last night. Of course, right away, what are you thinking? Woo! A little seawater on the brain. Paul says, here's what I can tell you guys. It's either all of us or none of us. And if anybody tries to hurt anybody else or get off of this thing and leave the rest of us high and dry, we're all going down. But he says if we do what we're supposed to do, we'll make it. Doesn't he say that? But then he says there in verse 26, but she's going to run aground. You don't have to live very long to know that God just may let your ship run aground. Now you're looking at me like, if you don't want to be here, how come you're here? I'm settled into Ohio. I got my station in life. All is well and all is good until we get a call that my wife's mother, some of you knew Nan Deffenbaugh, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Something specifically called Lewy bodies, proteins that attack the brain. And this strong, intelligent, tough woman was soon to get to a point where she didn't even know how to go to the bathroom by herself. And my wife said, we got to go. We got to go take care of her. I want to be with her in her dying days. I said, but I don't want to leave Ohio. And I want to quit preaching. This will be a good excuse. I'll just quit and get out of it. I'm tired of it anyways. Roger Brumfield called me and said, Chuck, I hear you got to move out west. I said, looks that way. Roger said, we need a preacher. And I just, okay, Lord. All right. I want you to know that I prayed until I couldn't pray anymore. I said, God, take my mother-in-law and take her soon. Take her now. She's a good Christian woman. Just let her walk in. You're not going to let her lay there and deteriorate and let us watch it. Are you going to do that, God? And that's exactly what He did. Y'all are looking at me stunned. You've never been a little bit perturbed at the Lord before? Now the problem is when you stay perturbed. But I said, Lord, what in the world are you doing? He let the ship run aground. But you go on in the story. The ship does run aground. The front end of it into the rocks, the back end, the waves are blowing it, it all falls apart. Paul says, we got to eat something. You're thinking, what planet's this guy on? Let's eat something. And before he eats, what's he do? He starts praying. Do y'all pray every day? Every day, rain or shine, good or bad. Is it ever a bad time to pray? No. Even in the dark of the night when the whole thing's falling apart, even for something as minor as food, what should you do? Pray, and not just pray, but be thankful. Did you know that Paul said to the Philippians, if you talk to God in prayer and petition with thanksgiving, you remember what he said will happen? The peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your heart. And if you're not praying every day, all the time, rain or shine, good or bad, you're missing out on the peace that God can give you that will guard your heart. You know what that means? It'll keep you from going nuts. But it comes when you get on your knees and you thank Him. In Daniel chapter 6, Daniel had been set up by his buddies, and his buddies said to the king Darius, why don't you make a decree that if you pray to anybody in the next 30 days, we'll throw them in the lion's den. Remember that? Verse 10 is one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. It says, and when Daniel heard the decree, he went up to his room and he opened the windows to Jerusalem. And what did he do? 3 times he prayed, and then there's this little line, as he had always done before. How many of you pray out of desperation? Is there a difference between praying out of habit and praying out of desperation? You betcha. And the people who pray because that's just what they've done before, they have that peace that passes understanding. When it runs aground, they jump into the water. They grab a hold of that plank. That's what gets them to the shore. God gave them something to hang on to, didn't He? When I got to Aberdeen this second time, I met my friend Shane Townsend again. I'd lost contact with Shane, but Shane was the first person I baptized in 1994. I didn't think there was anything wrong with Shane, and nobody else did. But she started going to the doctor a little bit more. The first Sunday of June of 2016, Shane came into the building and walked immediately up to me, and she shook my hand and she said, "I know that you don't want to be here, Chuck." But she said, "I know why you're here now." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "You're going to do my funeral. And you and Shannon are going to help prepare me to die." She said, "They said I have till Christmas," and they were right. Do you have to be where you only want to be before you can help somebody else? No. You might be the plank somebody needs to grab a hold of. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and feel sorry for somebody else. He gets on the island. He's building a fire. Remember this story? Is it okay if I go just a little bit over? What's it matter? You can't fire me. You just don't ever ask me back. He puts his hand down in there to put the sticks in the fire, and the snake comes out, and the snake clamps on his arm. And it's hilarious if you read the story, because the rest of the islanders go, "Oh, bad luck, buddy. You survived the shipwreck, but the snake got you. You must be a bad dude." But he shakes it off. And all of a sudden they said, "He's the opposite of a bad dude." And he went into the house of Publius for 3 days, the big cheese of the island. And it just so happened that Publius' dad was dying. What'd Paul do? He healed him. And then all the other islanders came and he healed him. Now, if you ask the people on the ship, "How was that experience?" "It was the worst experience of my whole life. It was awful. I don't know why God did it to us." If you ask Publius and his family, they would say, "It was the best thing that ever happened to us." So, I'm going to leave you with this story. You told me to be personal. I'm trying to be personal and put a face to the work. Wednesday night, we were doing a study of the rich fool, the parable of the rich fool. We're having this big discussion about how you never know when it might be your time. And we talked about this for about 20 minutes, and everybody just kept saying, "But you know, Chuck, the interesting thing is nobody ever thinks it really is their time. We have these sermons, and you all think the preacher's talking about another guy that's going to drop over in the near future." 20 minutes after that conversation, we're moving tables, and my brother Glenn says, "I don't feel well," and he goes to the floor. And he rolls on his back, and the color went out of his face, and his eyes rolled back, and he's gasping, and his wife dropped to the floor, and nobody really quite knew what to do, and it was just panic time. It just so happened to be that Chuck wasn't the only person who showed up at Aberdeen who didn't want to be at Aberdeen. God sent 5 other families within a 4-month period who just found themselves at Aberdeen, all of them members of the church. God kind of knows what He's doing. And it happened to be that one of those members, prior to leaving his home church, had taken a class on CPR. And he pushed as hard and as fast and as long as he could and gave Glenn just enough time for the rescuers to get there. And I'm happy to tell you that 2 months later, he was back leading singing. And 3 months later, he and I played golf, and he was awful. But he had an excuse. But the better part of that story is that Glenn's son-in-law, who was not a Christian, had been kind of lingering around the church. Y'all have lingerers? And they come and they're listening a little bit, but they don't come all the time. And you're kind of hoping and you're praying. And he was just kind of lingering. But after that happened to his father-in-law, he went from lingering to listening. And I could see it in his eyes as I preached that he was listening. And he would start commenting in class. And he started coming every Wednesday night. There's many of you who don't come every Wednesday night. And you're faithful Church of Christers. This guy was coming every Wednesday night. And Super Bowl Sunday of this year, he called me at 2 o'clock. Isn't that a fine time for a church member to call you? Super Bowl Sunday at 2 o'clock. And he said, if it wouldn't be a lot of trouble, could you meet me at the building? I'd like to be baptized. And if my beloved Cleveland Browns will ever win the Super Bowl, it still won't be a Super Bowl Sunday like I had this year. Now, I don't know if you followed my story, but I'm telling you that God can work through your shipwrecks. And God can save people through you. Thank you all for how you support us. We're doing what we know to do with it. We hope that we're impacting lives with it. But we know that something good is happening at the Aberdeen congregation. And we ask that you continue to be praying for us and thinking about us. If you all ever need anything, call somebody out. No, call me. And I will help you in any way that I humbly can.